Good morning and welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. My name is Kelly Vlahos. I am the editor of Responsible Statecraft, and I am here with my producers, as always, Sonia and Chris, and a very special guest today, Emily Jeshinski. For those who do not know Emily, she's ubiquitous these days as the co-host with Ryan Grimm on Counterpoints on the Breaking Points Network, and also After Party, which is part of Megyn Kelly's media network. She is also the Washington correspondent for Unheard magazine. And I know that she's played a key role in the National Journalism Center at the Young America's Foundation, where I have had the pleasure of speaking to some of its young fellows on a few occasions. Thank you, Emily, for taking the time with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. We have a ton to talk about, so I'm going to get right into it because I'm a voracious reader of everything about what's been going on with conservatives, particularly on foreign policy and the war in Iran. And you've been quite prolific on Unheard in terms of meeting the moment and kind of dissecting some of the key issues in that arena. And so I wanted to talk first about President Trump's polling numbers, not looking too good today. Chris, cut one.
Trump's disapproval rating has hit a record high 62%. That is the worst of either of Trump's terms. And in this new ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll, Trump is underwater on every single issue they tested, with 2/3 of Americans saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. But that being said, his base is still with him. 85% of Republicans approve, but look closer, the share who strongly approve has dropped to 45%, and that is the lowest among Republicans across both of his terms. Then if we dig into the issues that's driving this, about 3/4 of Americans disapprove of how Trump is handling the cost of living. Roughly 2/3 disapprove on the economy, the issue that Trump campaigned on, and a majority say using military force against Iran was a mistake, Gio.
You know, Emily, I know for the longest time, when I say longest time, but over the course of the war since February 28th, when it was launched, and even before that, throughout the last several months as we've been gearing up for war with Iran, the idea was that, Trump was facing a lot of criticism at home, but his base was solidly behind him on the matters of war. Are we seeing a dissipation of that core support today?
This is a really important question. And one of the things I think stands out from the polling we just looked at is that the gap between approve and strongly approve suggests what to me is what's the right way to put it, a certain amount of patience that Trump voters have for him, meaning they generally trust him. They trust him more than anybody else, at least. It still might not be 100% trust, but they trust him more than they trust Democrats, more than they trust establishment Republicans, and certainly more than they trust the media, the pundit class. And so what's interesting to me about that is we have seen it decline over the course of the war. And that to me feels like strong evidence. He's coasting off, even with these numbers as bad as they are, off of some fumes of patience that is baked in, patience and trust that is baked in for Trump with a lot of hardcore fans that he has. And how you measure the base is always interesting because sometimes it's measured by self-identified MAGA. Would you consider yourself a MAGA voter? Versus in this case, it was Republicans. And I think sometimes people talk about the Trump base and they kind of mean MAGA, or sometimes they just mean the Republican electorate. And MAGA even is having it still has very high support for Trump, but if you look at polls, even MAGA, it's slowly starting to kind of break away. Not break away. That's an overstatement, but it's slowly the support is slowly declining. And so I just think what that speaks to is people trusted him when he said the war was going to be quick and easy. And as it drags on, his bad numbers could become even worse than they already are.
Where do you think that that's coming from? Is it the economy? I mean, that's my gut, is that that's the that's the first line of defense that Trump has, is that he came into office saying, I am going to change things. I'm going to get rid of this awful Bidenomics. I am going to bring industry back. I am going to, make this a golden era. And it was centered around the worker, the Main Street. Do you think that's where, because you kind of pair that with the disapproval ratings regarding his work on the economy, and is that where MAGA is starting to peel off because of what they're feeling at the pump and other places?
Yeah, and I think it's these things go together. If you're considering maybe the Obama Trump voter, and they were told basically that this would be an administration stops foreign wars, no new wars. Now, obviously, Trump has been very hawkish on Iran for a long time, but when the normal person hears that, they hear no new wars. And I think it's a little cute to play and pretend like, oh, everyone, knew Donald Trump was going to do this. He didn't, break any major commitments to voters. But people heard that, and they heard that he would be putting workers first, and he would be putting America first. And then they see gas prices are going up, and everybody knows it's because of a war that was started thousands of miles away, once again, in the Middle East. And so when you put those two things together, it does feel like kind of a gut punch. And I get how some people, are still willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. I just don't think that'll last that long, because those gas prices are going to trickle into other parts of the economy. They're going to make flight prices go up. They're going to make, I've heard from family back in Wisconsin about fertilizer in farming. Like, this is going to start to very quickly be beyond just gas. And that's, it's just going to be hard for Trump to, and for Republicans to defend it, but for Trump to come back from that, because it feels like not only is it tough for the average voter, but it feels also, and additionally, like a betrayal and like dishonesty.
Yeah. Now let's talk about another factor, because I think perhaps in the first administration or in another reality, Trump might get away with a lot of this if he didn't have detractors in the conservative movement who were pointing out the failures of the war and the foreign policy and the alliance with Israel. And I'm talking specifically about Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, others who have come out against the war and have highlighted a lot of these things that you're speaking of. Let's go to cut 2.
In my experience, he changed drastically when he became president. The voices that he listened to also changed. He went from, well, my goodness, listening to people like Charlie Kirk and me and Tucker Carlson and people in that America First right, to now he listens to Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham and, God forbid, Laura Loomer, who can't even get a press pass at the White House, but he takes her phone calls late at night, which is ridiculous.
What do you think happened? Like, why do you think that is?
I don't know. I also think we have to pay attention to who donated the most money to him, that helped him become president. That's Miriam Adelson, hundreds of millions of dollars, and she is 100% pro-Israel. And so a lot of these voices that he started listening to and being convinced by are in the same lane. They're extremely pro-Israel.
Marjorie Taylor Greene there. She has been a tough critic of President Trump. This drumbeat, I'm calling it, how has that affected MAGA and conservatives as they are seeing with their own eyes what's happening in the war and at the gas pump and whatnot? Do they give those conservatives pause or permission to start questioning Trump's policies? What kind of effect have they? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting to think about now versus, 2003. And even on the left, you see this as well, where the tone of the conversation, obviously that was after September 11th, so there was a different climate. It's not apples and oranges, but it was much easier for the Bush administration to build a case that the public bought into about the Iraq War and Afghanistan to some extent as well. It's much more difficult, I think, now with the democratization of media to have the country united as it was before Iraq. And I mean, that lasted, it didn't last all that long. The public pretty quickly got exasperated with what was happening. But right now, that's on another level because of the democratization of the media, that you can't get away with, for example, Foundation for Defense of Democracy is putting these graphics together, the White House then pointing out or reusing FDD graphics. And the counterpoint to that is rocketing around the media in a way it just wouldn't have. I mean, that would have been, and you know this better than I do, Kelly, that would have been the authoritative information that most Americans were imbibing if we were talking about the early aughts. And now, even if you don't pay attention to new media that closely or old media that closely, it's just we're all swimming in this amalgamation because most people are on social media. Social media is where all of the news lives, and it's a cacophony. But I think a cacophony is sort of better than a solo at this point, to be honest.
Absolutely. You've been working in conservative media for a long time. Are you surprised at the evolution of Tucker Carlson? When I, as a young reporter in Washington during the Iraq War, I couldn't stand him. So, I mean, now, I appreciate him so much for being that voice of reason on war and foreign policy and standing up and representing conservatives who are not interventionists and restraint oriented. Are you surprised at his evolution?
I haven't been particularly surprised by Tucker just because he started around, I would say 2015, 2016, being willing to challenge the people who he'd spent his life sort of enmeshed with, this Washington blob class, the people that he worked, elbow to elbow with at the Weekly Standard, but also socialized with. And he started to get really, I think, deep and sharp in some of these criticisms. And to me, it just felt like a natural progression that as Trump did Midnight Hammer and then, of course, February 28th rolls along, it felt to me like Tucker had no choice but to go where he's gone if he was being kind of intellectually honest. And this is what I think is interesting is many people who criticize Tucker say it's the opposite, that he's gone in that direction for clicks or because he's deluded or deranged. But I feel like actually if you've been following his evolution, as I know you have, Kelly, very closely, you see the evolution is not quite the right word, but you can kind of see the progression as it's been happening. Right. And I feel like it's been a sort of, at least since 2015, 2016, over the last about 10 years, he's been pulling at the same thread, which is that the facade of Washington is totally, well, maybe it's fake. It's all fake. It's all based on lies. And the more you pull at that thread, I just feel like he had no choice but to end up where he is now.
Right. And it's very populist. Mm-hmm. And I do think that people forget that he was as resistant to interventionist war policy in the first Trump administration as he is now. So when I talk about this evolution, it's really like you said, it is a progression that started long before now. And I really appreciate it because when I do hear people attack Tucker Carlson as being opportunistic in that way, I said, well, you know what? He's pretty consistent. And I can go back to where he started talking about these issues and saying that going to war with Iran would be an absolute mistake because it would just, it would literally blow up our foreign policy in the Middle East. And that diplomacy actually was the better pathway. And there, as you know, Emily, there are other people in the administration today, like Elbridge Colby, for example, who actually made the same arguments. Unfortunately, he was called out for those arguments by the neocons when he came into the administration. There's still that tension between the neocons that Marjorie Taylor Greene was speaking of, and we call the realist and restrainer faction within the administration. Well, I want to move on.
I just wanted to add something quickly.
Yeah.
Which is that Tucker has also always had a lot of empathy, even in his most pro-establishment arc at the Weekly Standard. He wrote really beautiful pieces where he would have empathy for very eccentric characters, whether it's Marion Barry or Ron Paul. He revisited his old writings on Ron Paul with Ron Paul recently, which was super interesting.
That's right.
But I also just feel like he has had this, he's a deadhead, right? He's seen like 60 deadhead shows or something like that. Like I think he's always wanted to challenge some of these foundational principles, and you saw that come out in his empathy for eccentrics who were doing it. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
No, I think that's great. And I think he breaks the mold in so many ways. And I don't mean to make this the Tucker Carlson show, but he does break the mold. And that's why he frustrates a lot of people on the left. I know there are, and I'm not going to name names right now, but there have been several articles written in, say, in the last month or so, trying to explain Tucker Carlson's criticisms of Israel as only being within an anti-Semitic white nationalist context. And I feel like that is so shallow, and it says more about those folks on the left being so resistant to the idea that left and right could actually get together on some of these issues. There must be another explanation. Yeah, I do think we could probably have a whole show on Tucker Carlson, but I do think that he's miscast by a lot of people who don't understand conservatives. There are a lot of assumptions about who conservatives are, what animates them. And like you mentioned, here's a deadhead. I know a lot of conservative deadheads. It's really funny.
And Coulter.
Ann Coulter. There were a bunch of people at Fox News when I worked there. It was Carl Cameron, when he was the old reporter at Fox, big deadhead.
Wow.
There's Matt Kibbe, but he's more of a libertarian, but still a libertarian with, very, I would say, conservative leaning. So yeah, there's something to be plumbed there. Let's go on to I want to get onto the midterms. Take a look at this polling. I cut 3.
What's going on here, by the way, this is a 6 and an 8. What we're seeing here, choice for Congress, Republican-leaning independents in the 2024 election. Look at this. They supported Republican candidates by 83 points, but now it's 68 points. That's a 15-point drop again in only 18 months' time. These are not numbers that Republicans win with. These are numbers Republicans lose with.
Yeah. So what do you make about this? Like, I had read a story, and I think it was in the Washington Post. Let me grab it here. I'm going to say Washington Post, about the White House counsel's office giving private briefings to the administration's political appointees on how to best prepare for congressional oversight, because they really do believe that they will be facing a Democratic Congress after the November midterms. Do you think that they're overstating the case?
No, not at all. I think the Senate is very much in play right now. There are races in Nebraska. I think Nebraska is just not getting nearly enough attention. There's an independent candidate named Dan Osborne running in Nebraska. He's aligned with Democrats. There are a lot of, let's just say, national Democrats, kind of Bernie populist Democrats who are backing Dan Osborne, but I think Pete Ricketts is in real trouble. I think Ohio could go poorly for Republicans. Certainly Maine, possibly in play. North Carolina in play. I don't think Texas, but just right there, not only the House, but the Senate is also, I think, really, really up for grabs for Republicans. So they will be facing a flurry of subpoenas. They will be facing colonoscopies from Democrats for years. And the last part of the Trump administration is not going to be the agenda that Republicans hoped it would be. I mean, when you listen to them talk about tariffs, when you listen to them talk about foreign policy, a lot of it is explicitly built on a long-term plan for what's going to happen during the Trump agenda, because they thought, or the Trump administration, because they thought with all the cultural momentum of 2024 that they now had probably 8 years. They would have Trump, they would have Vance, and they would be able to have the exact same tariff policies, build on the foreign policies. And now it's looking like they might get 2 years just of full control of government. Now, Democrats, what's astounding about those numbers is the Democratic Party is still less favorable than the Republican Party, according to the RCP average. So some of these individualized races are going to be tough for Democrats, even with the generic polling looking as good as it is for them, because they have some troubles as well. But right now, just every sign is pointing to a wipeout.
Right, because they haven't really changed their agenda either.
Right.
They haven't changed the agenda that the majority of Americans rejected, during the first Trump and now the second Trump administration. So they got to get their act together too. Now, what about J.D. Vance? Now, you wrote a story for Unheard about speculation over whether Trump was purposefully hanging J.D. Vance out to dry by sending him into negotiations in Iran that were likely to fail. You concluded that Vance will undoubtedly lose some voters' trust for backing this war after publicly warning against it before Trump's second term. It's possible that the president decides to anoint Rubio as his successor in 2028 and Vance heads back to Ohio. What's almost certain is that Trump is not sabotaging his own vice president. The president is allergic to the optics of failure, although he doesn't always seem to share the same definition as failure as voters. That problem could be what plagues Vance. Lots of speculation over the fate of J.D. Vance. What say you on whether or not I know he'll run for president, but will he be contested in a primary?
Rubio and Vance have indicated that if one runs, the other won't. Now, whether or not that's actually true, I don't think we'll find out for another year or so. I could possibly see a scenario where JD is so wounded by being the negotiator in this war. The war is still going on. The war is still unpopular, or is even more unpopular. And because Rubio hasn't been the lead negotiator, Vance is just exhausted by Washington. He's not the type of career politician that Rubio is, where he's really wanted to climb the political ladder for years. He got into politics, less than 10 years ago at this point, and just decides to go back to Ohio and make a bunch of money, spend time with his family, sees the writing on the wall. That's one possibility. It wouldn't shock me if that happened. I think it's not likely, but it's possible. I don't know that Rubio would run against Vance unless there's some really compelling reason. And one of those reasons could be donors who have never particularly loved J.D. Vance and definitely trust Marco Rubio's foreign policy instincts much more than they trust J.D. Vance's.
Right.
If he is hearing from the Miriam Adelsons, who and others for many months saying, you're the guy, maybe that changes something.
Yes, and I've often thought of that because if J.D. Vance, who is representing the new right, the realists and restrainers, the populist right that were finished with all the endless wars, if he loses his grasp of those voters or that slice of MAGA, a Rubio could come in, and now he not only has the support of the hawkish elements in MAGA and the conservative movement, but he's a good crossover candidate because Washington knows him. They like him. And I say Washington, I mean the Washington War Party. So he has that appeal and to the old Republican guard as well. That doesn't leave Vance in a very good place.
It does not. It really does not, especially in Vance never really fully charmed the donor class, and I think some of that is to his credit. But then it becomes a problem when they can say over and over again, we have these clips of you saying no Iran war, and you then became the lead negotiator and you were openly backing it. Like, that is a really intimidating possibility for somebody going into a primary. Now, when you're vice president, you're probably fairly confident that you can handle those attacks. But if the donor class turns on J.D. Vance fully, that does create an opening for Rubio. My understanding is that they're actually genuine friends and they see each other as allies in the administration. But the last couple of months has featured a lot of stories leaking that Trump favors one over the other, that he favors Rubio. And that can totally poison a friendship because it breaks all of the trust. Is your camp leaking? Are you doing this on purpose? And things from there can become difficult.
Yeah, it's almost like an arms race, because you see a piece about how Trump is playing Rubio up as the best state, Secretary of State of all time. And then 2 days later, an article will come out saying, oh, well, Vance was the only guy in the room that opposed the war. And it just seems like it's almost like teams are responding to each other through these leaking strategies. That's tough. And another thing is, if the country is finished with Trump and Trumpism, I would imagine that Republicans or folks who are more inclined to vote Republican in a next presidential election might see Rubio as the more attractive candidate because he's less associated with MAGA and Trumpism. I know that that's kind of counterintuitive because he is, right there in the inner circle. But unlike J.D. Vance, he didn't really come in on that train. He was a guy who's, spent years in the Senate and being that sort of normie Republican. So I feel like when I talk about crossover, it's almost like the crossover to Republican voters who are tired of the craziness of the MAGA world.
Yeah, he's not like cultural MAGA. And that's I think an important distinction, because people don't see him as like a red hat guy, whereas they definitely see J.D. Vance as a red MAGA hat guy. And so I always think this is the biggest unanswered question in politics, which is how Donald Trump leaves office. And that maybe sounds silly, but on January 6th, you could hear the collective sigh from, Republican senators in Washington, D.C. They thought they were finally rid of Trumpism. They were so relieved and happy, and obviously disabused of that notion super quickly when voters were standing by Trump. But if Butler had gone differently, God forbid, this would be a very different Republican Party. If Trump goes out on another January 7th type exit, without all of the lawfare because he can't run for president again, that's a very different Republican Party. And it totally changes what happens with Rubio and Vance and anybody else in the future. Same thing with how long this war really goes, what happens in Iran, what happens in Venezuela. There's still a lot of really unanswered questions.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but I did want to talk a little bit about what MAGA looks like post-Trump. And I want to go revisiting with Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is convinced that there is she lays out the different factions of MAGA, but she's convinced that it's really about a generational divide. Can we look at cut 4, Chris?
Of it, Dasha, is again, I'll say this pro-war, the neocon, whatever this new gross version of MAGA is, it's not going to last because the younger generations just don't support it.
So what do you think of that, Emily, that this is about younger conservatives, older boomer, Fox News loving conservatives? Is that really going to play out when we see what emerges post-Trump?
She's definitely correct that the generational divide, even if you use Israel as like a proxy, the polling is absolutely stark between young Republicans and older Republicans. And Institutional trust, also the same story. There are a lot of very, very interesting polling divides between young and old that are they are so glaring. But what I am sort of skeptical of is the change in the electorate will happen quickly enough to matter for Trump and for MAGA, if that makes sense. I don't know that you really see millennials and Zoomers start making up a big enough portion of the Republican electorate to make a massive difference. There's still a lot of boomers, and even like older Gen X is a little bit different than younger millennials and Gen Z. So she's absolutely right in diagnosing that. There are very, very stark differences. I just don't know that the sort of transition is really that imminent in terms of the numbers. So it's enough to make a difference, of course, especially in tight primary battles. But it's I don't know that it's poised to be a total takeover within the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, I just like to make one point about the boomers, and I understand because I look at the polls too, and I see that stark difference, particularly on the war and on Israel, that the 55 and older crowd are much more open to the old arguments for supporting Israel and its policies in the region. But I have to say, a lot of boomers are also disappointed and are very skeptical that Trump is taking us in any positive direction when it comes to Iran and his policies in the Middle East. So it's not so cut and dry. And I just like to say that for once publicly, that a lot of these boomers are either, big Trump voters who are now very disillusioned and disenchanted, but they don't feel like they have anywhere to go politically. But then let's talk about boomers. Boomers are the counterculture of the 60s. So there are a lot of boomers out there who've been marching down the street at No Kings and anti-war protests. This whole idea that it's all that boomers are driving the war, that boomers are driving Trumpism is kind of silly. Because, I mean, if you're in DC, when you go to these protests, like there's a lot of gray hair there.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, I feel like the boomers are widely misrepresented, but I feel the spirit. I get it from the polling. Well, before we go, I do want to follow that thread about where conservatives could possibly go, and I'd like to just invoke this Matt Gaetz cut. He was speaking at CPAC this year. Cut 5, Chris.
I have another bit of advice. We cannot move into these midterms with self-inflicted wounds. We have to end this cancel culture that is now occurring on the right. Dissent and disagreement has to be allowed. Tucker Carlson isn't going anywhere. I didn't bring a list of people to denounce or disclaim, and anti-Semitism isn't hiding around every corner and in every bush. President Trump is a builder. He understands that politics is an exercise in addition, not subtraction and division. And so while I may not agree with the likes of Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro or Mike Huckabee that we have some sort of near slavish loyalty to a country in a faraway land, I would walk across hot coals arm in arm with those individuals to stop the Democrats from turning America into a more transsexual version of Venezuela.
I mean, that's it, right? I mean, if I was a MAGA Republican and I wanted to win elections, I would say, hey, listen, we have our differences, but do you really want to work to elect that Democrat over there that's going to bring back all of these woke policies that we've been fighting against for the last 10 years? So, I mean, I would imagine that's what we're looking at. Like, we have problems in our own family, but there's a bigger enemy out there to slay.
Yes, and I think that's totally true. And the question that is the question that will determine whether the coalition, the MAGA coalition, holds. Obviously, there are some of the quote unquote podcast bros who are already off the bandwagon, who are a really important part of the 2024 Trump coalition. But what brought them onto the bandwagon in the first place was total distrust and dislike for Democrats who were saying genuinely crazy things and were coming across as inauthentic. They felt like they were facing a lesser of two evils choice. And that dynamic is not really going away. And so for normal Republicans who aren't, kind of independent leaning podcasters or people who identify with that type of voice, it's very easy for them to say that it's an existential battle between Democrats who they feel are socialists, and they think socialism is an existential threat to the United States. And one of the most popular Democrats in the country right now is an open socialist. Many of the most popular Democrats in the country right now are open socialists. And a lot of Republicans feel like that does pose an existential threat, even bigger than what's happening in the Middle East. Now, people don't agree with that argument. I don't agree with that argument necessarily, but that is how folks are rationalizing continuing to go along with Republicans. So it's a balance. I mean, you can always, I think, rely on Democrats to give independents who are uncomfortable with Republicans reason to vote Republican. But yeah, how much Trump gives them and Republicans give them something to run to, I think remains that remains to be seen.
Absolutely. I think it's all about keeping things in perspective. I mean, on one hand, I don't like this easy dismissal of the Tucker Carlsons and the anti-war faction of MAGA as just this little tiny minority with a little loud voice. But then again, I don't want to just assume that the whole MAGA coalition is just going to shatter and that it's going to bring in a whole new Democratic era. I don't buy that either. So it's just good that you and I and others are watching the trends now and seeing where it takes us.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I follow your work very closely, Kelly. So
you. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I hope you will come back, and I appreciate all of your work on Counterpoints, on the Breaking Points Network, and all your writing on Unheard and After Party. I don't know where you get the time, but we're very lucky to have you.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate it. It was super fun to talk.
Take care.